Hey guys, I miss you all bunches. However, we are continuing to grow together and I hope that you're looking forward to your small groups tonight. You should check your leader's email for details, but right now we are going to dive in. So we are in week 2 of our series Undefeated, and I'm undefeated at something right now. I am basically undefeated at my video conferencing outfit. My video conferencing outfit is like an outfit mullet. Now, if you know about a mullet haircut, what you know is it's like business in the front, party in the back. Well, my outfit right now is like business on the top, sweatpants on the bottom. You know, this is our reality, guys. Social distancing. I'm just, keeping it 100. That's what's happening, right? But I think we all love this idea of being undefeated at something, even if it's something that's kind of silly, because we love to win, right? Like, nobody loves the feeling of defeat. And we've all felt the sting of defeat before. You know what I'm talking about. Like, that feeling when, let's say maybe you're playing soccer and the score is 12-0 and your team is the O and it's the first half. And we're like, ouch, like this hurts, right? Like, can I tell you about a time when I pretty much know I'm gonna feel the like impending doom of defeat? A time when I know I'm gonna encounter defeat? Bowling. Now, I am literally like the worst at bowling. And I know that there are those people that say that they're the worst at bowling, but then you go bowling with them and they're still like good at it. When I say that I'm the worst at bowling, I'm saying that like when I go bowling, I try and it is still like gutter ball city, like every single time, gutter ball. Like a couple of months ago, the Crosspoint staff even went bowling. And do you know who the worst bowler on Crosspoint staff is? This gal right here. Like, it's hard for me to get excited about bowling when I know that what is coming is defeat, right? There is pain in defeat. There is disappointment. And while I can laugh about it with bowling, right? When it's something you care about, it's a lot harder to laugh about. Like, let's say you try out for a team and you get cut. Or let's say you work up the courage to like shoot your shot and like tell that person, that you kind of like got a crush on them, right? And then you learn that they don't have a crush on you. Like at all. Like not at all. Or that feeling you get when you like study super hard for a test and you take the test and you're like, you feeling pretty good about it. And then you get your grade back. No bueno. Right? Like, and those, to some of you, those may not seem like big things, but if you're the one that's experiencing it, you know that what comes with it is hurt feelings and disappointment and sadness. Like defeat brings this like heaviness and this discouragement with us. And then there's this other kind of defeat, the kind that we don't talk about very much, the kind that we try to keep a secret, the kind that actually feels bigger and scarier and a lot more difficult to handle. For some of us, the worst feelings of defeat are when we have an idea of who we are, the kind of person that we want to be, but we find ourselves making choices that we are ashamed of. That can actually be the hardest feeling of defeat. Like, for example, you want to be the person who does the right thing, but you are really struggling to avoid looking at those pictures on the internet that you know you shouldn't be looking at. Or you want to be a person that is patient and kind with your family, particularly since now you're in the house with them all the time. But lately, maybe you've been yelling at your siblings and your parents and telling them how annoying they are and how they just don't get you. Or you want to be that person that tells the truth. Like you really do, but maybe lately you found yourself lying a lot. Like a whole lot, because in the moment it just seems easier. Or you want to be a person that is kind, but you find yourself gossiping about other people all the time. In fact, it might be that now, even when you connect with your friends, that might even be like the main thing you're doing. And so you find yourself falling short. missing the mark on the kind of person you know you could be, the kind of person you actually want to be. And when we fall short and we miss the mark on who God created us to be, we call that sin. Sometimes sin leaves us feeling ashamed or embarrassed or even like we failed in some way. Maybe it's left you wondering, am I always going to feel like this? Will I ever be able to overcome the things that feel like they are defeating me? Or am I going to keep falling short? Keep falling short of the kind of person you know God has called you to be and the kind of person you actually want to be. If you've experienced that frustration, you are not alone. We all have things that we struggle with. We all battle against habits or mistakes that we know are not good for us, sins that we personally struggle with. So if you are feeling defeated by your circumstances or by your habits or by some bad choices that you continue to make, I want to encourage you to hang in there because there is good news for all of us. And the good news is that there is another way. You see, those feelings of shame, they're a result of sin making us feel like we have to hide what we've done from other people. But most importantly, that sin and that shame makes us feel like we have to hide from God. And this can cause us to think that we are beyond God's love, that if God only knew what we had done, that he wouldn't want anything to do with us. But this is the beauty. This is the beauty of the cross. This is the beauty of Easter because it speaks directly into this feeling. You see, to help us understand this a little bit better, we're going to read from the book of Matthew. Now, it's important for us to know that Matthew is one of Jesus's disciples, and he wrote down many of the things that happened in Jesus's life. And so what we read here, what we're getting ready to read together, is a conversation that is happening between Jesus and his disciples as they're sitting down around a dinner table and they're celebrating the Passover meal. This is right before Jesus is arrested and taken to the cross. This is what's commonly referred to as the Last Supper. If you want to read along, we are in Matthew chapter 26, verse 20. Here we go. It says, when evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12. That's the 12 disciples. And while they were eating, he said, truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. And they were very sad and began to say to him, one after the other, surely you don't mean me, Lord. And Jesus replied, the one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go, that's Jesus. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to the man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born. Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, surely you don't mean me, Rabbi. Surely you don't mean me, Jesus. And Jesus answered, you have said so. So I want us to pause here and talk a little bit about what's happening. So we want to keep in mind that Jesus has had these 12 disciples, these 12 students that he has been traveling with and teaching. And what he's saying here is that one of those 12, Judas, is going to betray him. And in fact, it is Judas's betrayal that leads to Jesus being arrested and then crucified. So Jesus, being fully God and fully human, knows what Judas is going to do. He knows that Judas is going to betray him. But even so, look at what he says next. It says, while they were still eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke the bread and gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat. This is my body. Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many in the forgiveness of sins. This is what we call communion. And today we remember what Jesus did by taking bread and juice and remembering what Jesus did for us. Jesus said that the bread is his body and that the juice, this cup, is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. This communion meal, this is a sacred meal where we remember what Jesus did for us. And notice that Jesus does this for everyone at the table, including Judas, who he already knows is about to betray him. And that's really important. That's really important for us to remember, because when we are weighed down by shame and guilt of having missed the mark in sin, Jesus says, my blood is poured out for the forgiveness of sins. Jesus is showing us just how much he loves us, just how much he wants a relationship with us. He loves us so much that by his own choice, even when we are far from how God would have us to live, like Judas, he says, I am pouring out my blood for you for the forgiveness of sins. And at Easter, we celebrate what he chose to do out of love for us. You see, when we have sinned, when we have missed the mark on the life that God has for us, when we lie, when we look at things online that we shouldn't look at, when we degrade somebody else through gossip, when we are rude, when we're impatient with our family, when we feel ashamed, like our worth is diminished because of what we've done, when we feel like God doesn't want anything to do with us, sometimes we get stuck there and we forget that there is a way out. And this is why what Jesus did is so powerful. He says, I will give my life for you. That's how much I love you. In fact, Paul, an early follower of Jesus, puts it this way in his letter to the Roman church. In his letter, he is talking about how significant Jesus' death and resurrection are. And he said, this is in Romans chapter 5, verse 6, he says, you see, at the very right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely would anyone die for a righteous person. Though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Paul is reminding us that God shows us just how much he loves us because Christ died for us while we were still sinners. When we didn't have it together, when we had made all those bad choices, and this should be a game changer for us. When we start to understand that grace, when we start to understand the grace that God has shown us through his great, great love for us, that should shape the way that we think about our lives. We want our lives to respond to that with humble gratitude for all that God has done for us. And in response to receiving that grace for our sins, we want to live lives that honor God. The way that we live, the way that you and I navigate our lives, it's important. And we want to live in response to God's love for us. And so there might be some areas of our lives where we need to take some steps in order to live differently. Christ sets us free from our sins, but that doesn't mean that it's cool to keep living that way. It means that out of our immense gratitude for grace that we don't deserve, that we respond with a willingness to follow Jesus and a humble heart that desires to be obedient to him. And so if there is an area of your life that you are struggling to honor God, I encourage you to pause this video and talk to God about it right now. It is important for you to open your heart to God, to whatever you're struggling with. And I'll just remind you, he already knows. He already knows where you're struggling, but it's an important part of your relationship with him to invite him into that struggle. Ask God to help you remember who you are and how he sees you. Ask God to help you remember what is true about you because of Jesus. Ask God to help you remember that you didn't earn your perfect standing with him, but you can't fight to keep it. And then ask him to help you live a life that honors him, to live free to love and to not be held back by sin. That doesn't mean that we won't still be tempted to sin. It doesn't mean that we won't still struggle with sin in our lives, but it does mean that we can humbly take that to Jesus over and over again and let him help us overcome it. It does mean that sin doesn't have the final word in our lives and in our hearts. And we are reminded that God's love for us can be trusted, that we are free to live lives of love and of grace and participate humbly as followers of Christ. We can seek to honor all that Christ has done for us by trusting him with our lives and following him with our hearts. I love you guys. I'll see you next week.